Oh, hey guys, what's up? I got my glasses on and I've got my Maté. That can only mean two things. One, it's reading with Rob time, and two, I'm in Argentina. Both are correct. It is time for reading with Rob. Today, I'm going to cover this book. It's a hard copy book that I started reading in New York and got almost finished, but I had to lug it all the way to Argentina. I don't like hard copies usually because they're big and bulky and heavy and not great for traveling. Unfortunately, this book was only available at the time that I purchased it as a hard copy. It's called The Paper of Wreckage, an oral history of the New York Post, 1976 through 2024. The byline is The Rogues, Renegades, Wise Guys, Wankers, and Relentless Reporters Who Redefined American Media. It's by Susan Mulcahy and Frank D. Giacomo, who I believe both worked at the Post at one time. Now, if you're not familiar with the New York Post, it's been an institution in New York newspapers for a long, long time. As a matter of fact, I think it is the most, don't quote me on this, but I think it is the longest running, continuously publishing newspaper in the United States, I believe. And I think it may have been started by Patrick Henry. This book doesn't go back that far. It only goes back to, as it says, 1976. But the first owner that it highlights here was one of only two female newspaper owners back in the day, Dorothy Schiff. And it talks about, her times in the 50s when she owned the paper. She owned it for a long time. And in the mid 70s, started losing money. These were the bad old days for New York. And onto the scene comes a guy you may or may not be familiar with, Rupert Murdoch. So if you're not familiar with Rupert Murdoch, he's originally from Australia. His father, he basically left him a newspaper empire, and he built it, went to the UK and started tabloid journalism there, and then got bored with that or successful with that, and then moved to the United States and started with the New York Post and became an American citizen. He was I guess a billionaire at that point, and he bought his way into citizenship. So Rupert Murdoch since has gone on to start Fox News Channel. So he's become like this really conservative person. And but what is interesting about this book is it sort of gives you the backdrop of Murdoch's ownership and where he was at the time when he bought the paper. Now, full disclosure, I, of course, live in New York City and have lived there off and on, mostly on, since 1997. The New York Post was my paper of choice for at least a decade, probably two. I read it all the time. I loved it because you could pull it out. It's basically, you could read it on a plane. You have to stretch it out like a broadsheet like the New York Times. It was easy to carry. The headlines were outrageous and crazy. The business section was surprisingly good for a tabloid. Page 6, which is celebrity gossip, was always fun to read because it was just it's a very New York type of paper. I stopped reading it a few years ago as it got more and more, I would just say less and less actually, journalistic integrity. It started just putting forth rumors and gossip as news, as accuracy. And what's great about this book is that it interviews so many of the columnists and writers that were at the New York Post at the time. And they can tell you with some great insight about how often the New York Post would come up with a headline that suited what they wanted to get the information out and then find a story to match that headline. It's all about the headlines. It's all about the front page. It's all about Murdoch being able to impose his vision onto New York, which would then, of course, have repercussions across the United States. So it wasn't an obvious first thing that he did. It built over time, and over time it had less and less journalistic integrity until it got to the point that, in my view, it's unreadable. Now, the other thing about the New York Post is that I do know some of the columnists and writers who have been there over the years, so I was hoping to see some insights from them. Now, there were a ton of them. So there were only a couple that I knew that were used that gave their oral history in the book. Some pretty interesting stuff. I knew the TV writer. I knew one of the sports critics, Phil Mushnick. And when I say no, it just means exchanged emails with him. I did have coffee with the one guy. I forgot his name. who even helped me out a little bit on our South Africa episode with some context there. So I have known some columnists and writers for the New York Post, and the one thing I will tell you is they all kind of are irascible. They're just a different breed of people. Journalists are different. Newspaper writers in particular are a different breed in particular. But these guys, man, it gets wild. And that's what makes this book so entertaining. It just tells you the wild stories, very politically incorrect. Of course, it was at the time. That was just the thing to do. But the thing about the New York Post that I find, really disturbing is lately, I would say in the last 10 years since Trump came onto the scene, they have detached themselves further and further from reality and become more just a biased paper. And one of the reasons that they do this, because the New York Post famously does not make money. If you pick up one, you'll hardly see any ads. There's not enough newsstand sales of newspapers to make money. They lose money, and Murdoch is fine with that because he wants it to basically provide fodder for Fox News Channel. And what I mean by that is people will use the New York Post and say sources, or it's been published, or this has been said, and they'll use the New York Post as if it's some kind of credible organization and then put it on Fox News. And that way he can kind of like sacrifice the credibility of New York Post while still, quote unquote, trying to keep the credibility of Fox News Channel. Doesn't always work. As you may or may not know, Fox News Channel got sued by one of the voting, actually has gotten sued twice, is getting sued currently by one of the voting companies, software companies or hardware companies from the 2020 election, and settled with the other one for $750 million by defaming them and basically putting out there that the election somehow was stolen in 2020, the big lie, as they call it. Now, when the big lie first happened, Fox News pulled back from that and they shed viewers, and it cost them a lot of money, and then they quickly reversed course and started telling the big lie, just like Newsmax and OAN, who were eating into their market share. Now, I know this because I work in the media and I keep an eye on this stuff. It doesn't really apply to the book that much, but it does talk about without the New York Post, guess what? There would be no Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was nothing but a page 6 promoter. He was just begging to be on page 6 all the time. That's all he cared about was the exposure. Lies, truth didn't matter. Rumors and innuendo, that's Donald Trump's world. So without New York Post, there'd likely never have been an apprentice, meaning that there would likely have never been a Trump presidency, and what we're going through now. Also, without the New York Post, there would not have been Fox News Channel. And without Fox News Channel, you can just imagine what a world it might be. Without Fox News Channel, there also would be no MSNBC. So the extremes would be very different. Maybe we would have gotten there anyway on our own. I don't know. It would be a great thought. It's a great thought experience to think about it. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is this is entertaining if you're interested in hearing about either old New York history or just the wild antics of people who made newspapers, in the New York Post in particular back in the day. It won't give you that much insight into Murdoch and his media empire or his political ambitions, but it will give you some. And if you have no basis of that, I have some, plenty actually. So it wasn't a lot of new information for me, but I still found it very entertaining. So I think it's worth picking up. I am not sure that if you're not inside of media, that it's going to be that entertaining. You either need to be a New York City junkie, because I loved reading about old New York. When I moved there, that was already fading away. Or just someone who's a media junkie, or really, really, really into politics. God bless you. I think we all have to be right now, but I don't want to be, But God bless you if you are, you really want to see this. This is a good book. I would pick it up if that is you. Otherwise, I would just say, hey, there are better books out there to understand other subjects. But for this subject, it was a really good book. I enjoyed it immensely. Again, it's called The Paper of Wreckage. It's a great title. That's what the newspaper is called. I call it the New York Joke now because it's kind of a joke. I will add an addendum. Just a couple of days ago, the New York Post put out a front page basically pushing back against Donald Trump's lies about Ukraine, and that Zelensky is a dictator, Ukraine invaded itself and started the war, or it was Ukraine's fault that Russia invaded. All those lies that Trump put out there, those shocking lies, shocking to some, not to me. They did push back, and a lot of people, were celebrating the New York Post, and rightfully so, for doing that. Every now and then, the New York Post will step up, and I think it's Murdoch's way of saying, "Hey, you've gone too far. I want to pull you back from the brink." Now, whether he has any power to do so or not, I don't know. He's in his 90s. Lachlan, his son, is set to inherit. Lachlan shares Rupert's political opinions, apparently, and the other three children are fighting because basically it's secession. As I said, if you've seen Secession, you understand. So they're fighting the inheritance, and they're fighting Lachlan. And supposedly they don't share Lachlan's conservative bent, and they're horrified by what Fox News has done to the world and to this country. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out. It's like a modern day soap opera. My view of Fox News hasn't changed after reading this book. I don't know if yours will or not, but what it does tell you, it gives you clear indication of when they started going over to the dark side, which is almost immediately when they started doing tabloid journalism. Facts are secondary to the story. Facts are secondary to the headline. So keep in mind, when they do the right thing, they're still not your friend. You can never trust. They're not credible. The New York Post is just not a credible newspaper. And God forbid anybody that gets on their bad side, hopefully they don't come after me, because they pummel you, they destroy you, they destroyed many lives, and they're gleeful about it. They love it. That's the New York Post for you. That's modern day, quote unquote, conservatism. I don't call that conservatism. I call it extreme right wingism. But no matter what you call it, it's inhumane. And that's what the New York Post, the Paper of Wreckage, is all about. It'll give you some insight if you want to check that out. Thanks. I think I had too much Maté.